to Scandinavia. You know, the other day I received a lovely email from Roger Bucknell saying nice things about the filed repair video I did last week, including compliments for my being able to pronounce the name correctly. Well, we've got the reverse situation this time. Having done a couple of videos about these, I have to make a retraction. This guitar is a Goya, produced by a company I've been pronouncing Levin forever. Levin, it seems, is actually Levine. I should have known this, of course, having watched Mats Sundin be the captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs for a full decade. Apparently IN in Swedish is an een sound. So it's Levine. So as I mentioned, this is a Goya, the subsidiary brand, which is the name you come up with if you want to market your guitars. Because you know that guitars are specifically a Spanish instrument, right? So you call them a Goya. This is a model M24 from 1958. Very pretty little guitar, sort of like a Gibson LG1. And this one is also going to get transmogrified into a left-handed version. I talked with a couple of guitar players at the Hamilton Guitar Show the other weekend who heaped praise upon me for opening up a world of guitars for the left-handed folk. They really seem to appreciate it. I mean, the conversions are minimally invasive. We changed the saddle angle, but they can go back to being right-handed with very little consequence. You know, I don't feel bad about these mods. This one, however, needs a neck reset. And as we've mentioned in the past, Levine came up with a rather interesting truss rod setup in the mid to late 50s, where the rod passes directly through the end block, and it's bent in a kind of dog leg to do that. I've never tried to reset one of these before. I'm hoping it's not too terrible. We're going to see. Famous last words. There's a nice little badge on the headstock. What is the action height? It's just about 8/64ths, a little over 3 millimeters, 125 thousandths. Some people can handle that. This has got extremely light strings on it right now. I think we'd much rather see a lower action. Relief in the neck is about 3 thousandths of an inch, which is pretty tight. I wouldn't want to make it tighter. There might be a little bit of a complication because of the deforming and dipping of the fingerboard extension over top of the soundboard in front of the sound hole. Yeah, it's full of hills and dales. The bridge is still full height. It's never been messed with. I believe it's the original saddle. These pins appear to be replacements. The soundboard has had a couple of cracks which have been repaired. They've been glued up. We might see if we can add a little bit of color or something in there to make them less stark and apparent. Brazilian rosewood fretboard. Small, very flat, annoying frets. The body, which has some pretty evocative finish checking. I think this is European sycamore. It looks like maple. It's got very long ray flex. So that's kind of the hallmark of European sycamore. There's a Goya label from A.B. Herman Carlson Levine from not Gothenburg, it's Göteborg, Sweden. Straight edge held on the top surface of the frets comes to about the midway point up the height of the bridge. We would of course like it about there, just over top of the bridge height. With no string tension on the strings, the rule comes to a point about 1/32 of an inch up the bridge. So that means that this soundboard pulls up about 1/32 of an inch under tension, which is quite normal. There should be a gap there of about 1/32 of an inch when I've reset the neck. Well, I think we'd like to assume that the fretboard extension is glued down, but it's wobbly enough that I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, it is glued down. Put some heat on it. Let's shrink ourselves down and go on a voyage of discovery. We'll step inside. It's a familiar looking bracing pattern, good old X-brace, nothing scary, until we look at the back braces. That's a rather dramatic split. And the one that's more distant is unglued from the back. Let's turn the camera around and check out the neck block to inspect the bolts holding the neck on. Right. It's not a hex head. It's a nut with an unidentified square recess, which is not a Robertson. Hooray. So now I'm into looking at all of my various hex bits. See if something comes close to fitting. Yeah, inner lip here is exceedingly sharp, straight off the razor. So I'm going to try and soften that slightly by sanding it. Can you imagine what this is doing to the tone? Well, the hex 4 is too small, the hex 5 is too big. That would seem to suggest that a 3/16 would be the way to go. Well, using the 3/16 Allen wrench, I managed to get it out. This, of course, is probably not the ideal tool to use. You would really want a square drive. I had a look online. There's some available, but nothing that comes even close to this size. So, you know, there's a little bit of a landing down at the bottom. This thing goes in and kind of finds a spot where it feels okay and just, you know, didn't do any serious mangling to the drive. I can't see why they would do this. This seems to be like a proprietary kind of thing. Maybe to keep your uninitiated from taking the neck off. The literature does mention taking it to a specialist repair person, so maybe this was something they gave out to, you know, their warranty shops. The upper nut, which is connected to the truss rod, is really tight. And I'm thinking maybe if I can loosen this end off, it might give me a little bit of play, maybe. But of course this is non-standard too. It appears to be bigger than 5/16, and even my cut down wrench won't fit in there. So looking at this nut here, measuring it, seems to be about 195 thousandths across. I managed to get this one out by using this Allen wrench, which is 187 thousandths, getting it in there and letting it sort of jam fit itself. And that went okay, but the other one, I think the fit is too sloppy, you know, because it's a much tighter fit. So I'm wondering whether I can take this 5mm job here, which is, I think, the right dimension along two sides of the hex. Yeah, that's about right. So if I do that and then file or sand off from the opposite corners, which are about 25 thousandths oversized, maybe I'll be able to get something that fits snugly, and I can use my little ratchet. So I'm bargaining on the fact that even though this is hardened steel, it may not have been hardened all that well. and yeah, this is way above and beyond the call. I mean, most repair shops, like the smart thing to do is to turn around at this point and say, hey, sorry, no. Like a glove. No, this recess fits significantly different from the other one. Filing and fitting and filing and fitting and gradually eroding the second knuckle on my thumb. It seems to be locked on there in a reasonable fashion. Yeah, it's a long nut. Oh, would you look at that. Heavenly days. They didn't glue the stupid thing on as well. Here are the bolts. This is the truss rod, and it's kind of mobile. This one up here it's captured in the hole. It doesn't come out, but it's real wiggly. There's already a pretty generous undercut for most of the heel here. I'm just going to pare back on the end a little bit. where most of the material is going to have to come off. Back brace time. We have to talk about grain orientation in braces. This is not the first Goya / Levin that demonstrates this particular problem. Braces are generally cut from quarter sawn wood. That means that the grain lines run sort of perpendicular to the gluing surface, vertically, directly through the piece of wood. Irvin Samoji did some testing about 25 years ago, to see what effects this kind of grain orientation has on the stiffness of a brace. And rather surprisingly, he found that changing the grain from vertical to horizontal, like this, has very little effect on the stiffness, everything else being equal. He came up with a deflection gauge that did a whole bunch of testing. But we don't see braces with the grain oriented parallel to the soundboard or back very often. This hasn't always been the case. Historically, lute construction always had the braces made that way for like 250 years. Back in the 15th, 16th, 17th century, when you ordered your soundboard wood, it came split, like a cedar roofing shake. It's a standard product, you order a bunch of them. They might be about a 1/4 inch thick or so, and after you've cut out your soundboards, you end up with a whole bunch of these offcuts. Really good quality fir or spruce that you could simply stand on edge for braces. And lute braces are usually quite narrow and quite tall. They can be like 1 inch or 25 millimeters tall in some cases. But this was an efficient use of materials and very cost effective. Kind of get away with it in a lute for a number of reasons based on the sort of the shape of the bowl and the soundboard's thinness and other things. The quarter sawn thing is important because it produces wood that is stable through the cycles of hydration and dehydration. If you make a piece of wood that's a rectangle out of quarter sawn material, it stays rectangular. The size will change, it'll shrink and expand, but the proportions don't. It's not prone to warping as much. Wood that has the grain running through at an angle, or rift sawn, will tend to turn into a parallelogram, or lose its symmetry and be more prone to warping. There's an unbalanced situation, especially when you constrain one edge by gluing it down to the soundboard. They tend to turn into funny shapes. So it doesn't seem like there should be a big problem if you take a quarter sawn piece of wood and flip it on its side, right? But there's this tendency for a split to form. Perhaps a grain line isn't as strong as its brethren. Maybe there's an incipient little check in there or something. The plate it's glued to will experience bowing or cupping as the humidity changes, or perhaps it suffers an impact. There's nothing to stop a crack from propagating all the way across the brace. Ordinarily, any splitting tendencies of the grain lines are held in check by being glued to the plate. They're supported. This is, I think, the third Levin I've experienced that has had this exact problem. Putting some paper towel down to try and protect the label. I'm going to tape off beside the brace as well. I'm rolling the tape on sticky side out on a little dowel here. I want to back up the area under the brace using this flexible batten that's got some cork on it. This will provide counter pressure against clamping the brace and help it conform to the natural arch of the back. I clamp this in the region of the lining strip on the inside. Wouldn't want to clamp down in the center here, and there's not a whole lot of pressure, it's just enough to hold the batten in place, really. So it's basically kind of stretching with the clamping pressure. These bodies are narrow, and there's not a whole lot of room, even with my jack closed to its shortest length. And this is a long break and it's quite delicate. So the way I'm going to handle this is using this flexible strip, well, it's minimally flexible, of spruce, which is maybe a little over 3/16 of an inch thick, maybe 5 millimeters. And that's going to bridge the upper back brace, and that one I'll be able to press down on it with a clamp through the sound hole, and that will force things down and provide enough pressure to close up that gap. I'll do this in a series of clamp ups, I think. Just be easier to clean up after myself. I'm squeezing in some glue with a syringe. I've got a couple of bridging strips in there, and these posts increase the available clamping height so that it's above the surface of the sound hole, and I can put my clamps on. I've also got a small C-clamp in there with very light pressure just to hold the two halves of the brace in alignment. Back braces have been re-glued. Let's plug the saddle slot. Okay, I think we'll be making a new saddle. This is Brazilian rosewood. Got an old bridge here which I occasionally take pieces from. And I think I can use a chunk to fill that slot. Should be big enough. I need to install some side dot markers. It's a very skinny piece of binding. I like to take a couple of swipes with a knife at the very end to create a little point on the plastic dowel material because it's quite a snug fit. These are 1/16 of an inch dots. I'll plane down the excess saddle plug material. I'll sand and then apply a couple of coats of shellac to make it match the rest of the bridge. You can see that the plug material shows up quite dark. Over time it will mellow to a more orangey color like the rest of the bridge. However, as we'll soon see, this was completely unnecessary. I use a chisel to pare back the slight protuberance of the dot markers. It's time to pull sandpaper through the joint to remove material from the end of the heel and thus tip the neck backwards relative to the body and create a line from the frets that extends higher above the bridge. Once I'm satisfied with the neck angle, I'll plane myself a wedge for the fingerboard extension, and I'll get that glued in place with some cawls. When it's had a chance to dry, I'll plane it back so it's flush with the binding. Then I'll use some markers to darken it up. As I suspected, it took a long time to get the neck bolted back on and arranged in the proper location, so I've waited till after doing that to glue the extension on. There are two transverse braces in here that are pretty close together. This is a cawl that fits between them. Also spend a little bit of time with some markers touching up the raw wood exposed from the cracks that had previously been repaired. Having carefully measured the basic intonation points from the nut, I'll make a line on the bridge. I'll set up my saddle slotting jig and cut the channel. Well, this is one of those crazy times when my new saddle slot ends up in exactly the same location as the previous saddle slot, even with the reversing of compensation, because the bridge was glued on at a slight angle. And now it actually looks like it's backwards, but it's not. The original nut here I knew would require a little bit of a shim, especially on the base side here, just looking at things. So I glued on a little piece of mahogany. The spacing is alright. The frets are, well, they're 30 thousandths, so I might be able to get one thin little dressing out of them. Let's have a look at this truss rod nut here. I managed to lose the footage, or actually I didn't press record when I loosened it off when I was trying to get the nut off the other end of the rod. This is a non-standard size. It is bigger than 5/8 or 8 millimeters, and this access port here is such that you couldn't fit any of the standard wrenches into it, even my cut down one. I do have this 11/32 socket which will fit with an extender. Just something to be aware of. Like, your standard tools are probably not going to work on this thing. In fact, I'm just going to make a little note in here for the next person. You can see that these have been dressed down at least once. They've got a rough striated surface on top from either sandpaper or a file or something. And really want to clean that up as much as possible. Okay, so I'm just recrowning, trying to reduce the flat area on the top of the frets to its absolute minimum in an effort to not have to dress off any more height, because these are about as low as I would want them. Don't want to lose any more. It's one of those things, like, where do you stop with a guitar like this? Personally, I would really love to refret this thing with frets that come all the way to the edge of the binding and the whole bit, but already I think, like, we've got enough work into this that we're sort of pushing past the market value. Polishing, polishing, polishing. The nut width on this is pretty narrow. 1 5/8, well, 1 21/32, which is like, I don't know, 41.5 millimeters. So, not a whole lot of room in there. So I'll do a preliminary reshaping of the nut slots for left-handed use. Notice how low the holes are in the tuner posts. They're just above the level of the ferrule, to the point where I don't think you could get a full wrap of the bass string under the hole, which is not ideal. Yeah, so I'm doing what we have to do on certain old lap steel models and wrap up the post. He wanted something other than those stark white bridge pins, and I've got these nice rosewood ones, which seem fitting. It can be really helpful to bevel the end of the pin. This helps keep the ball end of the string from getting hung up on it. Well, that's that. What do I think? I'm going to say it aloud. I've done quite a lot of work for this customer, and the only reason I took on this job is because it's a slightly less well-known maker, and it has that odd neck attachment, which I'd never dealt with, so there's some curiosity on my part. But if I wasn't making a video, this guitar would not get on the bench. I'm not singling out this particular owner, but I want to address the notion that I'm seeing a lot of guys buying these old, really broken, what we might call second-tier guitars online, sight unseen, a lot of times, with the assumption that they can easily find a person who will make them into a fantastic instrument. And I've had people begging over multiple emails out of desperation, like, I spent $500 and nobody wants to fix it. Just because something is made in the 50s does not guarantee it's superb. There were an awful lot of campfire guitars out there back in the day, and they're still around. Now, this owner is currently in the throes of a Nick Drake fascination, and if you go down that rabbit hole, you'll discover one of his early instruments was a Levin, not this model though. Whether that's what Nick recorded with will precipitate fistfights among that particular group of enthusiasts, so watch yourself. I just want to say, when you see something with this much damage, you know, lots of top cracks, those loose and broken back braces with super high action, I'd say, unless you're the one who's going to do the work, you got to hold your horses and wait for an example to show up that's in better condition. Because you don't know what you're going to end up with sonically. You can invest a whole bunch of money fixing something to the point where it's playable and then discover that you don't really want to, at which point you're deeply underwater. Anyway, it's a pretty guitar, it plays, and the action is good. It's also the most ladder-braced sounding X-braced guitar I've ever encountered.